Hey, this is Derek. I just wanted to talk a little bit today about Mormonism. I think it's a very fascinating subject, and I want to sort of take it from a perspective as if I were a third party, a neutral third party. There are a lot of other religions that are interesting: Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh day Adventists, Scientologists. Let's see, any other American religions that are pretty noteworthy? I'm trying to think, but yeah, so these sort of startup religions are really interesting. So I don't think um, we need to talk about it from a way of like discontent or like frustrations with dealing with that background, because like that's something you do have to deal with whenever you make any significant life change. Like even if you went from rooting one sports team to another, like that would require an adjustment and adaptation. When something is more core to your identity, like religion, that can be a little harder, but I'm not really here to discuss that. You have to work through that on your own. Good luck with that. It's a journey, it's a process. I think you'll do great. But right now, I just want to think about like what I would think about it if I learned everything I know, but like from a more neutral perspective. And the one thing we have to recognize off the bat is that religions are like what they ask people is like the premise is that it's an incredible story. So right off the bat, the premise is something that would strain credulity. So that would be hard to believe if you just read it in the newspaper or something. You're like, well, that doesn't sound right. So all these religions, especially these startup religions, they seem to have a story that's almost fantastic, unbelievable. So we have to sort of accept that premise, acknowledge it for what it is. If we try to like say, oh, it's something that maybe we could judge evidence neutrally, well, yes, that does matter, but we have to acknowledge the basic premise. This is a fantastic story. It it is something that would typically be outside the normal experience, outside of believability. So for us to believe it would require some extra motivation, some extra reason, some extra importance. And so that actually sets you up so then you have a reason. It's like, well, if people do believe something so incredulous, then why? Like, there must be something very special there. There must be something very amazing. And I think in a certain sense that is sort of the gimmick, the con. The con is not to like prove to you or convince you that it's real. The con is more like this is a critical question that you must decide whether you're for or against. Like that's sort of the con, and that's sort of the sneaky part of it. Like it's not about whether it's true or not, it's about whether it's an important question. So like most questions like are niche questions that only specific people would care about. Like let's say you had a question about the atmosphere of Venus or something, the temperature. Like most of these questions we don't care about. Like it doesn't affect our lives. Why should it like even play any impact on us? Like why are we talking about this in terms of religion? So if there's these ancient books that do all these things and all this stuff, and it's like, well, that's cool, that's a cool story, like that'd be awesome if it was true, but like why would that affect our lives? And what relevance does that have to what I think or believe about who I am? I think that's the most important question that religions sort of provide an answer to for people. Is the question of identity, purpose, belonging. Like that's all core to what religions are. But anyway, with Mormonism specifically, if we look at the incredible story of Joseph Smith, and I think we can sort of take his basic outline for it. Like it's described, especially what's become sort of standard in the church. He was confused by all these religions. He wanted to know which of all of them was true. Now, we could just accept the story given at face value that everything is true, everything is, even though it's hard to believe, but we could at least consider alternate explanations. And I think the simplest explanation is basically like, you can even use supernatural explanations. Like, if believing requires you to accept supernatural premises, then you can also accept those premises for disbelief. So we can just say, hey, Joseph Smith was so intensely fixated on finding out the true religion that he sort of manifests his own religion, that if there were one true religion, then this would be how it works. And so he was just so intensely obsessed with this question that he sort of, in a fervor or fever, he generated his own answer to it. He created a reality that he wanted. So that, in my mind, would be the most simple and direct explanation of what happened. And you could even say, hey, there's some supernatural things involved. He played with magic, he did divination, he did all this stuff. And you could even say that played a role in that. Now, you don't have to rely on that supernatural explanation, but if you can use supernatural things to accept it, you can also use supernatural mechanisms in rejecting or in an alternative. So that's an important thing. So we could even accept the premise that divination is real. Like, all this stuff he was obsessed with, like finding golden plates, all this stuff, we can accept, like, maybe he was a great treasure hunter. We could even accept that, but that doesn't even necessarily make the totality of the claims true. It could be just like, hey, he was the best treasure hunter in the world. Like, we could even accept that and then be like, but then he embellished incredibly upon that. He was able to magically find these treasures, but then he did so by inventing his stories in his head, these embellishments, these fantasies, because for the most part, there's no direct connection to most of what he expressed, that was published as religious in the religion. There's no, direct connection to any historical thing. They're random artifacts, and then there's huge embellishments on what the artifact would actually have. So now if you're a skeptic, you would be like, oh, were those artifacts even real? Yeah, that's great, but you don't even have to do that. You just have to say, hey, maybe there was some amount of unexplainable thing by conventional explanations that played a role in this, but then you don't have to continue that and say, oh, everything he said was accurate. You could be like, well, he sort of imagined stuff, he embellished, he extrapolated. So it's just a giant, not a hoax, but it's a very dedicated type obsession almost to create something that you wish was real. So it's again, manifesting would seem to be the most direct and simple explanation for what is going on here. But that's just if you want to go take a middle ground between a completely skeptical interpretation and a completely supernatural interpretation. If you're okay, maybe there's some things that we don't understand with materialists. Maybe dowsing can be used to find water, which is something that he commonly did. Maybe these things can work to an extent, but maybe it's just like a quantum computer or something. So maybe there are some things that we don't understand how they work, but the next, that doesn't mean you have to go to accept every part of the story, especially once you start bringing in these supernatural, incredible mechanisms. You can't just assume that only one possible explanation. I mean, if you're only considering one explanation, then I don't think you're really doing a good job there. But the thing I didn't like necessarily, and maybe this is getting a little more personal, but The thing I didn't like was that the way they said you should pray to know it's true. Now, if you like accept prayer as a valid exercise, then it can be powerful, and personal revelation and all that stuff. That can be powerful, useful. That can be incredibly personal. That could be intimate with either your spirituality or some type of deity or something. So that can be a powerful tool, but I don't believe that you can divinate or like just pray to know something that you don't put in the work otherwise. So like when you just say pray to know if the Book of Mormon is true, I don't think that's the right question. I think you would pray, hey, is joining the Mormon religion a good choice for me? Should I pray to do this? So I think a lot of people pray and then they don't get an answer because they aren't looking for like personal revelation, things that are relevant to them. They're just trying to, like, the instruction is to pray to know if this historical artifact matches the story. Like, it's this very difficult thing. Now, Mormonism is puts a huge emphasis on principles. Like, principles are important. So, like, if you want a reward, you need to put in the work for something. So that's what it seemed like to me with this whole pray to know if it's true. Like, that's not the appropriate way to learn or test the truth, these historical claims. Like, you have to do historical work to test historical claims. If you're just looking for personal revelation, is this a good congregation for me to join? Would it better my life to believe in something? I think that can be true. But like trying to just pray to know if someone like Moroni or Nephi was a historical figure, like, that's not something that you should expect to work. That's like expecting too much, but that's my opinion on that. But anyway, it's real fascinating because there's parallels between other communities in the LDS community, and it's interesting how it's evolved over time, for sure. But again, like, that's sort of my basic view now. Like, the con of it is convincing you that these historical trivia, I guess this historical trivia or these obscure historical claims are somehow relevant to a personal story about your spiritual identity. So I think that's sort of the con of it, that we have to litigate these very obscure and esoteric historical questions about these claims out of nowhere, essentially. Like, sure, you have the papyri that came from Egypt, and then Joseph told stories from the papyri. Like, apparently the explanation now is that he just received revelation based on seeing that. So it's not even that he translated the papyri from the Pearl of Great Price. It's that he examined it, and then he was able to, like, have revelation of what actually happened. And again, to me, that comes across as this idea of, like, praying to know if a historical fact is true. That's not the right tool you would use to investigate history. So again, it's divination. It's expecting a reward not commensurate with what your contribution is. So, I mean, sometimes you can get lucky and get huge rewards for not very little work, but I don't know. It just seems very odd that you're making this narrative of your spiritual self about these very obscure historical events and, like, these artifacts that with very specific interpretations. Like, yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very unique thing. Like, even these other startup religions, whether Scientology or the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, religions from the First Great Awakening or the Second Great Awakening, Like, they had very interesting, unique things. And Knowing Better is a great YouTube channel that covers this, but the YouTuber Knowing Better, he covers a lot of these prophecies of like the millennial or second coming that these different religions would make and then revise. But Mormonism like takes it to a next level, like with the art of like actually writing a full-fledged book. That is impressive. Like, and just because that's an unlikely thing to happen, when you see something unlikely happen that is hard to explain, potentially you're like, hey, something incredible must have happened to generate this. But the level of unlikeliness of writing a book like a Book of Mormon, starting a religion, is one thing, but the level of unlikeliness of actually like getting these ancient artifacts and doing all that, that's a whole step. That's like orders and orders of magnitude less likely. Like, there's so much more involved that would be required to have that happen. Like, as unlikely as it is to be able to write a book, it's way more unlikely to find these really ancient artifacts and do all that stuff. But the problem for me comes when you make your personal relationships about how people, what people think about these claims. Like, when people are investigating historical claims, when they're investigating spiritual identity, they need some allowance and permission. You need to give people space to find themselves, and that can be hard in the community that sort of makes the whole identity about loyalty to a specific conclusion. Like, it's like making a community around an erroneous math proof. Like, I don't know. But it is fascinating, and it is an interesting bit of history to look at. A very unique religion, and a world that has less and less religion all the time. So if we're talking about my own journey away from the religion, I didn't really litigate so much the LDS religion specifically. Maybe a little bit, slightly. Mostly, I wanted to know, hey, is the Bible accurate? Is Christianity accurate? For me, that was the bigger thing. And it's like, well, I don't really think it is. I think the Bible is a story. It came from stories. Like, it's a fascinating community. It's a fascinating set of beliefs. But when I started thinking history was old, like, starting to believe in deep time, like, humans lived for 100,000 years, maybe human-like ancestors 1,000,000 years ago. Like, I guess written history sort of aligns with the timeline of the Bible. Written history is said to be about 5,000 years old, and the biblical timeline is about that. But so that was the thing that I was like, hey, this is hard to believe. I believe fossils were old, dead things were old. So, in which there were some LDS theology things specifically with old Earth. I know not all LDS people believe in young Earth, but with the doctrine of the fall, I sort of found that most compatible with the young Earth explanation, like an Earth that's thousands of years old. The idea that there was no death in the world and then death came in later, like, I had a hard time making that fit with things living and dying for millions, hundreds of millions of years worth of natural history. Completely independent records. Like, each fossil is an independent record. One book translated with magic rocks by some guy who hid it in a hat and then gave the artifact to an angel. That is not even one artifact. That's like a story of an artifact. So, I mean, it's hard. The weight of evidence. If you're trying to take an evidentiary view, like if you're looking at fossils, there's thousands of fossils, maybe hundreds of thousands of fossils. I mean, when you start talking about things like trilobites, there's probably millions of fossils of trilobites and stuff. But yeah, so the weight of evidence just doesn't seem to be that great here. So it's like you must be believing for something else. And again, some people wouldn't even necessarily find these two ideas in contradiction. They could believe in evolution. They could believe in an Earth that's hundreds of millions of years old. I just don't see how that would make sense with humanity as being such a central figure. Like, humanity happens to have intelligence, but if the world got along without intelligence for hundreds of millions of years, like, what are we doing? Like, so intelligence seems like an amazing gift that we have that comes with an obligation to our environment. I mean, I like to think of it that way, but that gets very philosophical. But this is all fun to talk about, so thanks for checking this out.